Hey, warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson. Now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Rob Donaldson. He does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets Show. We're going to be diving in with what we've all seen over the last few days with the Pac-12 coming back to life, and if that has any impact whatsoever on what we're going to be seeing for this upcoming year, I will give you guys a little bit of a spoiler. No, in terms of betting perspective, that really doesn't matter, but in terms of just fun in college basketball and excitement, that certainly does matter. So we're going to take a little bit more of a look at what we can expect out of the Mountain West this year, what we can expect out of those teams. We're going to be diving in as well on just the new look of West Coast basketball, how these teams that were in the Pac-12 are going to be faring in the Big Ten, how tightly knit the Big Ten is as well, and a few teams that our good friend Rob is bullish and bearish on as well. So going to have a nice chat with him coming up in a few minutes, and really didn't get a lot of news in college basketball, so I do want to hear what you want me to address on this podcast prior to the start of the season, because Hayes in the barn with a lot of these rosters. I do have one piece of news that I will share with you guys here in a minute, but if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, / just general topic that you want me to dive into, you've got one or two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter / X timeline at @JD_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and please do fire those in, because we are starting to get closer and closer to the upcoming college basketball season. I only have 6 conference previews left to do, so please do send those in. I want to try to make you guys as profitable and prepared for the season as humanly possible, because now we know a lot of these rosters. There's still going to be a few roster updates that are going to be happening, because you've got a lot of the HBCU schools that typically hold off until mid to late September to release their roster. They literally wait until the last second to be able to do so due to eligibility and not wanting their guys to get poached away to bigger schools, but we did see this as well. There was one guy that was very curious that was out there on the market for the transfer portal, and it appears as though this man is not going to be playing Division I basketball. Ontario Morris, a former top 50 recruit, guy that was over at Texas and Kansas, said, let's just say off the court turmoil, he's going to be playing over at South Plains College. That's one of the better junior colleges in all of college basketball. He has decided to go down a level, and we have seen this with quite a few guys that sometimes they have some off the court kerfuffles, and I think that that's about the most polite way of putting it. Like we saw this past off season with Central Florida and the fact that they were willing to take a stab on Mikey Williams. Williams was like over at 5 different schools he had committed to, but he had a few off the court issues, decided that he was going to tear it up, and absolutely did at the junior college level. That feels like that is going to be the route for Ontario Morris, and something that I've been trying to do on this podcast is try to highlight some of these guys that might be coming up from the junior college level and might be able to really elevate their teams, because we've been seeing it a little bit more and more. Heck, we've seen guys go from the junior college level up to college basketball and then get drafted as high as in the first round. So these are guys that you don't want to be sleeping upon for Ontario Morris. You can sleep upon him for this coming year, but he might resurface for the 2025-26 season, where he might be tearing it up at a school near you. So something to be mindful of, and we're always mindful of getting great guests on this podcast like Rob Donaldson. We're going to be talking about the Mountain West, the Pac-12 teams, and how they're going to be faring in their new conference, and some of the teams that he's looking at for the upcoming season. That's up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and it is always great to be joined by this man as we've got Rob Donaldson aboard. He does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He does an amazing job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. And this time of year, also doing a great job on the NFL front, college football, MLB, and so much more, as you're able to find all of his college football bets over on his YouTube feed, youtube.com/Rob Donaldson. And you'll be able to follow Rob on Twitter/X. That is at RobDFB altogether. And Rob, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And, you know, the more and more we do these episodes for college basketball, the closer and closer the season is getting. And we're knocking on the door already, man. It's been moving fast. Time is a crazy concept.
Yes, it certainly is. I am thirsty for some college basketball, and I'm going to be thirsty for the Pac-12 for quite a while, because the Pac-12 will not be back in our lives this year. But we did see a few days ago those four teams in the Mountain West, and Colorado State, San Diego State, Fresno State, and Boise State, they're now going to be forming an alliance with Oregon State along with Washington State for a Pac-6 that I think will be taking hold in 2 years. They're looking for a few more dance partners because you need 8 teams for a conference, and right now the Mountain West is left at 8 teams. But how do you take a look at this sort of ordeal, and does it have any impact on it this season? Because the way that I look at it, even though it's very fun to take a look at, it really doesn't impact how I view these teams for this year. It's more of a something fun to take a look at down the line sort of thing for me.
Yeah, that's 100% my thinking as well. And we saw this play out last year with Texas and Oklahoma still playing in the Big 12 for their respective sports, whether it was football, where both teams did extremely well, or college basketball, where they were, just kind of the exact same as what we expected, I think. And that's going to be still the thing. These are still talented basketball teams, although there might be a little bit of edge in certain matchups because they're leaving the Mountain West, and it's going to be a final, hurrah for some of these teams to get one last shot in. I don't think ultimately it's going to change the actual in-game performance aspect.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And I do think that it is going to be really interesting to see what we get out of those teams moving forward, because I actually think that they're getting the creme de la creme teams in terms of basketball from the Mountain West. You can make your debates for football. This is not a football podcast, so you can do what you want there. But as we know, Boise State, obviously, and college football has got a pretty rock-solid team in their own right. But I do think that when it comes to the teams that they were looking for to be able to join this alliance, Washington State and Oregon State did a rock-solid job. And if I were to grade out these 6 teams right now, I would still have Oregon State at the bottom of all 6 of them.
Right. That's kind of ultimately my takeaway, is that if you added, let's just say the reverse was true of Oregon State and Washington State were joining the Mountain West, I don't think either of those teams would be in the top 3 in terms of the standings of where you would peg them. Maybe Wazoo, but now they have coaching turnover, they have player turnover. I wouldn't necessarily be buying them as a Mountain West top contender. And now it's just who's the next domino to fall? You mentioned it. There's 6 teams now. There's clearly going to be a lot more incentive, and Pac-12 out there in the West has the most money to get anybody they want. And this is finally a good reason enough for, I think, a team like Gonzaga to join the mix, but we'll see what happens.
No doubt about it, and I will backtrack a little bit. I said that Oregon State would be the bottom team. I lied, because Fresno State, if you take a look at them for this upcoming season, I'm not sure if you've done your research on them, but boy, this is rough, as we've got Rob Donaldson of the Rob's Best Bet Show joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And just how do you take a look at a team that they hire on a senior citizen in Vance Wahlberg, who was coaching up high school basketball last year? He's done a little bit of everything as an assistant, whether that be at the professional level, whether that be at the college level. So he certainly has put in a lot of years in general to basketball, but I look at the hire for Fresno State, and to me, it just made no sense at all.
Fresno State is obviously a long ways removed from the Paul George days when they were actually competent. And night after night, even just a few seasons ago, they were winning 20-plus games and felt like a team that, hey, they play a heavy defensive style. They can get after it on both sides of the ball. They were a fun team to watch, and it's just fallen off a cliff. And unfortunately, when you do sit in that mix of the mid-major level, there can be a massive fall-off when you're just kind of banking on those flash-in-the-pan seasons to bring in recruits that don't ever really come. I think that's kind of where Fresno State is at, but just more to a drastic degree in comparison to some other teams.
Yep, absolutely. I do think that it's going to be interesting to look at them moving forward. And for Fresno State, it is a bunch that I do think might be able to have a little bit of defensive toughness. I like the fact that they bring in more Sek, that 7'1" big man from Hawaii. They've got Dioff, I can't pronounce his first name, a freshman who's 6'11" that I think has a little bit of upside as well. But I do think that that's going to be a little bit of intrigue. And I think the entire Mountain West is so fascinating because they got a record amount of teams into the NCAA tournament last year. And you had a few wins for San Diego State. Colorado State was able to embarrass Virginia on a national stage, but really past that, a lot of these teams fell short. But I just think that this Mountain West from a season ago is going to be a little bit down from what we've seen because of the coaching turnover, for one. And two, I feel like a lot of these, shall we say, stalwart players, those great guys in the backcourt for New Mexico, what have you, them moving on really does affect this conference.
I will say I agree with that. At the same time, when I do look at the Mountain West as a standalone conference, I think that this picture that we're seeing right now is more inspiring than the picture that we got last year with the Pac-12. And even when you are looking at the head coaches who align this league, you do have guys like a Pitino and a Dutcher who have been there forever, and Medved over at Colorado State, and a number of other coaches that I think are respectable, have been proven that they can get there and do it. For that reason, I think that they'll always have a nice product level in terms of the aligning themselves with the other mid-major conferences. But, to your point, I do think it's going to be more down than it was last year when they did get in so many different teams. I still think that at the top of this league, it's going to be competitive night in and night out, and that's why I do love Mountain West basketball.
No question about it. Heck, we saw Air Force go on the road and knock off UNLV by 30 points last season. So you never know what you're going to get out there in the Mountain West. And you bring up something so interesting because you compare the Mountain West to the Pac-12, and you're talking about it being a little bit more competitive than what the Pac-12 was last year. And what are some of your expectations for those Pac-12 teams that are just all across the nation now? If you join the ACC, if you join the Big 12, and if you join the Big 10, because I feel like all those teams, really sans a few of those teams, join the Big 12, because I think other than Arizona, the other three teams are going to be in for a little bit of a downer. But I think that all those teams have a chance to, at the very least, do something, because I think that Cal, Stanford, they were towards the bottom of the Pac-12 last year, but they're joining an ACC that I just wouldn't put on the same par as a Big 10 in terms of 1 through 15, 1 through however many schools you have in the conference. But I do think that all these teams have a chance to be relatively competitive year number one, since those teams I was alluding to in the Big 12.
It's certainly interesting, right? Because you have a lot of teams that are on the coast, whether it's Oregon and Washington or Cal or Stanford or UCLA, that are now going to be traveling all the way to the East Coast, with only 3 or 4 days in between. It's an interesting dynamic because we've never seen anything like it, and we will probably never see something like this in terms of an adjustment period season of how are players who are in college and 18, 19, 20 years old going to react to this crazy amount of hours being logged, not for just travel, but for preparation and the nutrition level of just being ready for these long-winded trips. I think it's going to be making betting really interesting for us. And in terms of the actual play on the court, I don't know what to expect. And that's why I think makes this season so fun.
Yep, I think so as well. And I do think that this could be the biggest season of volatility that I've ever seen for that reason, as Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the Rob's Best Bet Show, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, because I think that if you try to peg how the travel is going to be affecting these teams, how these teams from the Pac-12 are going to be integrating with all these conferences, you can make a whole big bundle full of money. And if you guess incorrectly, it could be really doomsday for your bankroll as well. So I don't think that it's necessarily easier to gauge. I don't know if it's necessarily harder, but I think the proper word for coming into the season is that it might be the most volatile and unknown.
Yeah, and especially because, what we know from just the road trips that go up into the mountains and to the altitude, those can throw off teams pretty drastically, and we never really know what to expect on those trips, because sometimes it looks like a team never runs out of energy, and then other times through the first quarter, they're 2 for 28 from the field, and they just want to get out of there. And when you are talking about the jet lag going from West Coast to East Coast on a short turnaround, and then maybe playing 2 games in succession, I'm guessing that's probably going to align very similarly, where you don't know how a team is going to be, because, man, these are still college athletes. They still have other duties outside of just the sport. And on top of that, they are not professionals that have finely tuned their bodies. There's going to be a lot of volatility. To your point, I think that's where maybe you can try to key in on certain things early, but I don't think that's going to be the case all season long. And from a betting perspective, that makes it really difficult to kind of gauge where to go.
Yep, and the Big Ten already was having a big giant edge for a home court advantage prior to all this. Now that you've got Rutgers heading on over to the great state of California, man, that is going to be causing for some very interesting road trips. And I do think that it is going to be so interesting for gauging home court as well, because now I think that there's a lot of nuance with it, because for the longest time in sports betting, you typically would just give the home team 3 points and you call it a day. That, I think, is a model that has been done away with by a lot of people. But now I feel like there's even more intricacies with it as well, because in a conference like the NEC, the Metro Atlantic, where there are some teams in the Metro Atlantic that they quite literally hop on the subway to travel to their opponent, that's probably not worth 3 points. And at the same time, if Rutgers of California is worth 3 points. I think that that's off base as well, because I think that that should be worth much more than 3.
Yeah, and I think we're going to start seeing for the first time in a while in conference a lot more double-digit spreads. Ultimately, especially if some of these, long road trip games turn out to be just snoozers because the home team destroys. And that's where it's really a game changer, because when you are talking about the high-level major conferences, we've seen, double-digit spreads laid on a regular basis by an FAU in past years and some of these other mid-major teams that have been more dominant. But when you're looking at the Big 12 or the ACC or the Big 10 or the SEC, it's very rare that you're going to see, game after game for certain teams laying double digits in conference play. And that's where I think we're going to start seeing some spreads that we just really haven't seen in past years.
Yep, I think that it is going to be really interesting to look at those spreads. So one conference I think is not going to have a ton of them is going to be the Big Ten, because I'm not sure how you've been gauging this conference for the upcoming season, but I just look at that conference and I really don't see a team that is really above the top 10. Perhaps you have Purdue in your top 10, but outside of that, you have a few teams are within the top 25, a lot of bubble-licious teams, but no one team I think is really terrible as well. I think that that's going to cause for the Big Ten to be so intriguing to be able to gauge. I think that that could be a tremendous underdog conference for this upcoming season.
Oh, absolutely. And when you are looking at some of the coaches in that league in particular, we talked about, the Mountain West and how they're aligned with some of these, brilliant guys who are spearheading programs. Well, there's a lot of guys from a lot of different successful backgrounds in the sport of college basketball and in professional basketball that are spearheading programs in this league. Man, a lot of uncertainty from a lot of different programs when you look across the board. But I will say the talent level probably is still on par with a lot of the past years that we've seen. And it's just a matter of, how do these transfers gel at a school like Michigan or at a school like Indiana? And can Illinois just kind of be that same old turnstile factory where they're still producing great big men and other great guards? And then Michigan State, Purdue, and the teams or the programs that have solidified head coaches who have been there for a long time and are just constantly competitive, are they still going to be those 20-win programs or those 22-win, programs in a given season? Man, we could be thinking about the Big Ten, a month into the season completely different than what we are right now.
Oh, I'm right there with you, with the margins being so thin. And if a team gets off to a massive start, which we've seen from Purdue over the last few seasons, that could greatly change our outlook on them. / if we see a team go straight down the toilet bowl, like, I don't know, Michigan, after they had their first few wins of the season, it looked like they were going to be actually a really good team. And then, man, everything went wrong for them. That was a intriguing situation, as well as we do have one of our good friends, Rob Donaldson of the Rob's Best Bet Show, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And this is always one of my favorite questions to ask, because you do such a great job gauging this game of college basketball. You, much like myself, doing a great job researching and getting set for the upcoming season. And just in your evaluations and how you're preparing for the season, have there been a few teams over the last few weeks that you've taken a look at and either you've had to change your opinion on them a little bit, or just in deep diving on them, you're either feeling a little bit more bullish or a little bit more bearish on them?
Well, last year, in particular, when you're looking at the A10, and that was a conference that I think got more onto the scene because of Duquesne and their tournament run, but obviously had teams like VCU and Dayton aligning the mix as well. There's a team that had a lot of hype going into last season that fell short of expectations, let's just say, and that was St. Joseph. And the reason why that they got all the hype was because they had some really great guard play, and guess what? That guard play is still there. I feel like St. Joseph's took a massive step forward last year, even despite the underwhelming finish. And because of that, that's a team that in the mid-major ranks, I think they could take advantage of maybe the year after the hype, exploding onto the scene, because they definitely have the talent to do so.
Yeah, with the Atlantic 10, I think that there's a lot of teams that are going to be right there towards the top with having all those returning guards over at St. Joe's. I really like what George Mason has. VCU returns a ton. Dayton is bringing in Posh Alexander and Zed Key. Those are guys that were starting in the Big East and the Big Ten. Loyola Chicago does a great job on defense. St. Louis brings in Josh Schertz. UMass has a rock-solid coach in Frank Martin. You mentioned Duquesne, a little bit of changing of guard there, but I like what they're building. So there is a ton to love about the Atlantic 10, and there's a ton to love about your work, Rob. You do such an amazing job looking at baseball, college football, the NFL, college basketball, and so much more. So let the good people know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, I always appreciate you inviting me on, man, especially when we're talking about college basketball, because it keeps me engaged, it keeps the viewers engaged, and this is such a great sport. But, for people who want to follow my bets in other sports, you can do so on Twitter/X at RobDFB, and also on my YouTube channel, just my name, Rob Donaldson. And as always, Greg, really appreciate having me on.
Always great to be able to have Rob aboard. He does such a great job taking a look at the sport that we all know and love of college basketball, and is a true wealth of knowledge. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Jaden_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And I do encourage you guys to fire those in, because we are now in the stage where most of these rosters are all set. So want to know what you guys want to hear on this podcast to get you guys set for the upcoming season. And other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. It's going to be a tremendous college basketball season, and I will be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.